Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you on Monday, August 7th, on behalf of Arcade Economics. Today we have what I think will be an exciting video. We have a Clif High Webbot update. Cliff was on with Greg Hunter of USA Watchdog the other day. Got a chance to listen to his interview. I've actually heard it twice now. As usual with Cliff, some stunning information in there. And before we get started, based on our last Clif High video, I saw quickly that he's become a polarizing figure. Some people think he's pretty darn intelligent and has a lot of value to offer. I fall in that camp. There are a lot of Cliff critics out there as well, and in either case, you're all welcome to comment, leave your thoughts below. Hopefully we can keep things respectful, but to the degree that I find it interesting and think there's some value in there, I have a couple notes to get to today that hopefully will help give you the gist of the interview if in case you don't have time to sit through the whole hour of it. Although we will link to it below, and I'd say if you do have time to check it out, it's always fascinating to hear Cliff talk. Of course, the big stuff that I'm always listening for is if he has any updated thoughts on the silver market. As many are aware, Clif High has been making some silver and Bitcoin predictions, of which the Bitcoin ones have worked out a bit better. And before y'all write in, yes, I understand Cliff has his silver predictions. Basically, none of them have happened yet. And well, hopefully we can maybe just stem one. I don't think Cliff is a guy who's getting up there lying for some nefarious purpose. He's spoken regularly about why, and in this interview he touches again on why he thought his model's been picking up earlier dates that we haven't seen prices move yet. But I guess one of the things he touched on and was really, when I saw his interview posted on Silver Doctors, the title was that we are watching the system crash now. Yes, I get it. For the silver investors out there, we haven't seen that price rise, which I think a lot of us expect. Certainly any evidence I've seen, if you look at the fundamentals or what's going on, would still be very much intact. But that doesn't mean that we aren't seeing things happen. Now there's the dollar index, which continues to get torched pretty solidly. I think it's down to about 93 now. Again, that's measuring the dollar against some of the other paper currencies. So maybe not really the best metric to look at. But again, I think as we see money going into the cryptocurrencies, and also money going, we've talked about Andrew McGuire, so I believe there's money going into the precious metal sectors, perhaps more so on an institutional level than the average guy on the street, where just somewhat anecdotally, when I hear a couple friends who own buy and sell silver shops where people can take their coins in, or they can buy stuff, and certainly, from what I hear, it seems like retail, there's a lot of sellers, but in either case, I think Bitcoin's one of the signs that you're seeing things happen. Again, just a wider awareness of really how this whole system is built. Another big factor. But anyway, so with that said, Cliff, again, take this for what you will, because anyone says, I think this is going to go at point X in time, maybe isn't enough to rush out and, risk every available piece of capital and bet on it. But again, just factoring it in as a data point, a guy who, again, to me seems pretty darn intelligent and has had some interesting success with the Bitcoin market. Either case, he still says July or August and September, things are a little quiet, but watch out after that with precious metals and Bitcoin over these next couple months, finally starting to all rise in tandem, which I know would be good news. But on to grab my marker here so we can cross off a few notes. So again, he didn't get into as much saying silver is going to be here by date X, which again, the guys acknowledged that there's things in his model that struggle to pick up the silver pricing. But there were a lot of other interesting comments he made. Again, I get it that especially a lot of the hard money guys are a little skeptical of the cryptocurrencies, which I understand. And again, I'm maybe not complete beginner to cryptocurrencies, although far from an expert. However, one of the things that has been interesting as I continue to learn more about them is that we're not just talking about some guy making up pet rock and saying there's this many of them and just implying some value. But one that I've been hearing a lot about in particular lately is Veritasium, which is a crypto that's been doing some interesting things. Clif actually recently interviewed the fellow that's running Veritasium, Reggie Middleton. And for example, I guess one of the broad ways they described Veritasium was that imagine some of these industries with a lot of middlemen and infrastructure and waste, whether it's healthcare. In fact, a good example that they actually mentioned was in the mortgage industry, which if anyone's had the pleasure of buying a property, it's not a half-hour transaction like you go in and buy a stereo. Often takes about somewhere between 30 to 90 days to really get the whole thing completed. Yet the Veritasium structure, according to Reggie Middleton, which he talks about in that interview with Clif, can take what can be somewhere in the range of 30 to 90 days to, if you actually have the title and the insurance and all the logistics in place, the crypto software allowing a transaction like that to take place in a day or even less, which is really stunning. If that's, again, I couldn't tell you whether that actually will work as planned. Although I tend, just from the degree to which you can hear and evaluate other people speak about something, I think there is something to what's going on here. You may have heard, if you're following it, that Veritasium has also been working with the Jamaican Stock Exchange. And it's interesting, in the interview again, Reggie mentions how a lot of these transactions now where Goldman Sachs will be the middleman, now we can have something where it's buyer to seller. Things are clear. There's an honest chain, unlike you see with, again, the places where the precious metals are traded, like the COMEX or the LBMA, where there's just a lot of banker, what would even be the word to say? It's hard to really see what's going on, and you don't feel like it's a fair game. So it's interesting that the cryptos, again, not just perhaps an alternative to the currency, but really, and I think what will perhaps separate some of them is the ones that are actually providing some sort of additional value. Again, by all means, I'm not saying go out and buy Veritasium, although everything I hear, a lot of interesting things. I'm excited to keep learning more about that one. And to the degree of, I didn't start this channel to say buy this stock or buy that asset, but rather the purpose being I see the system changing, the current dollar-based regime that we have being unsustainable. So, okay, what can we do intelligently moving forward? Certainly, if you can see where things are headed, and start learning about those and seeing the way in which your own particular skill set can offer value there, obviously, I'm always in favor of that. So that's our quick note on Veritasium. One of the things that was interesting, he mentioned kind of comparing it to a credit, the credit cards, where every time Visa does a transaction, you're creating debt. So Visa can create thousands of debt-based transactions, but whether it's Litecoin or Veritasium or Bitcoin, to be able to actually clear payment, not creating debt, but saying, I have this, I'm sending it to you in exchange for that, and have those payments cleared without just creating some new digital currency. That's the types of things that, again, in the same way that the internet really changed, there were some things, hey, you still want to read the book, whether you're buying it from the store or Amazon. So there's similarities, but just in terms of creating an infrastructure and a new, more efficient way of doing things, which certainly, whether it's the printed money or healthcare or insurance or mortgages, we always hear about how much money gets wasted in between there. And that's where Reggie Milton and Veritasium are focusing. So certainly the infrastructure is interesting. And at the risk, again, of upsetting the gold and silver crowd, again, I preface this as saying that I'm a hardcore silver fan. What I have, somewhere above 90% of it is in silver, which I by all means don't recommend to most other normal humans, but not someone who doesn't appreciate the story behind silver yet. As I've heard some of the crypto supporters speak more, there is something to be said for the fact that if you think of what will be a currency or money, I think gold and silver will certainly be valuable and increase in value, certainly as priced in dollars. Yet, if you want to go buy a cup of coffee, if silver is over $100 or something, again, you can't really shave a little sliver of that off. I would imagine there will be some form of silver or gold-based debit cards. I think that already is available now. But just to the degree that we have a culture that wants to click on something, have the payment sent, whether it's using PayPal but just the digital nature of the way things are done, I think silver and gold, silver in particular, because you don't have to count on a monetary value. There's just the demand and the industrial use of silver versus what's actually available. That alone gives silver a great investment thesis. But again, how feasible is it to actually use as a currency? I think there are arguments that can be made either way. Where I tend to fall these days is thinking both the metals and the cryptos have a role in a system that goes past the dollar, and I think there's value in both. So again, another thing Clif mentioned here, actually this I found really interesting. The Greg Hunter of USA Watchdog was asking him about the sanctions, and whether if we're going to start a trade war with Russia, and Clif responded saying how, well, they can place sanctions on Russia or China or whoever, but one of the things, again, interesting about the cryptos is that, again, this is in Clif's words, I can't confirm this because his knowledge of crypto is far beyond mine, although I tend to feel pretty safe taking his opinion on that. Feel free to write in and let me know if you feel otherwise. But basically that right now you can hire a contractor in Russia, pay them in Bitcoin, and there's really no way for whether it's the IRS or any regulatory agency. It was interesting the way he phrased it, in that he was saying there is no real way for that to be traced, even if there were, that you're talking about agencies that don't really have the understanding or the manpower or the expertise to know how to do that, which I know sounds, or I don't know how that sounds, although when you think about how similar with the SEC, even if, let's say the intention really was to get to the bottom of all these things, they're often just so overpowered by the power and intellectual, whether one of the banks can hire however many guys to sit there and do what they do versus the SEC, often just outmanned in that kind of match. Cliff was saying the IRS doesn't know who to tax on a Bitcoin. They wouldn't even know how to find the transaction, which is certainly interesting. I'm sure that they'll try. But again, just what I like is how he pointed out that we are seeing people leave the dollar system. Now, what percentage it is or how quickly that happens or on what timeline, those are all variables that we'll find out, I believe, sooner than later. But again, just interesting seeing how these systems that are being created and put in place are transitioning us into the future. And one last note about the just how it's really a new system that is kind of detaching itself from the old one. Cliff also mentioned how you could have companies doing a lot of business and even perhaps paying their employees in crypto, but that doesn't show up on something, for example, like the government GDP measure or any of these dollar-based metrics. And I'm sure there are people out there that are experts at exploiting all of the loopholes. And by all means, I'm not not making any legal comment on that one, but more just the interview was fascinating because Cliff is really great at pointing out. Sure, he has his model that makes price predictions, and you can think what you want of that. Yet, I'm always excited when he has new interviews because the content that's in there, it feels like you're getting a sneak peek into a lot of the future changes, how things are playing out, realizing that life does go on. And while certainly the fact that the U.S. is in this situation and countries around the world are in a similar situation where they printed currencies, borrowed, and left themselves in a corner, there's also the exciting part that, hey, if you can let go of the emotion behind that and see, all right, well, if this is where we are, what necessarily can be how things change going forward. I think from that standpoint, it's a really exciting time. So with that said, leave your comments below. I'm sure we'll have plenty again today. The interview is linked below as well. Hopefully this was a somewhat helpful summary. And that said, leave your comments, and we'll see you again tomorrow. Thanks.